All right, I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this is Friends and Enemies, and I'm here with my German co-host, Alex Benesch. I'm Jeff Nyquist, and today we're going to be talking about the occult, UFOs, and the role in espionage and the Cold War and the ongoing war that's for control of the human destiny. How's it going, Alex?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I thought we might start by just explaining kind of what the occult, how the occult works. I saw you had done a video on the occult and espionage, and you were explaining there how occult groups are ideal for infiltrating, ideal for getting people to come clean with some information and to recruit people as agents. Maybe you could kind of explain how that works, how the occult world, the world of occult lodges and secret societies, how that helps major industrial espionage in its activities.
Well, I mean, it's basically impossible to tell what came first, the intelligence business or occultism. And if you look at the ancient world and ancient sources, there's really no telling what came first, but it always seemed to be connected one way or the other. I mean, obviously you had quite a bit of cult activity in the ancient world, and sometimes people get confused when the term mystery cult is used. So just so everybody knows that in let's say ancient Rome or in ancient Greece, there was a great variety of religious systems and cults. Some were more exclusive than others, and some were even very, very much restricted. So, for example, there once was this Mithras cult in the Roman Empire, and this thing was so secret that nothing survived publicly that would tell us what was going on in these cult meetings that were held in very secluded places, very small little temples, sometimes in caves, sometimes in people's basements, very well hidden. And we just do not know what they were doing there because the secrecy was apparently total, or anything that might have leaked was subsequently tracked down. There is some literature that indicates people were very concerned in Roman times about some of these cults, and they were complaining about it. And then you never heard from these critics ever again. And so this is kind of the distinction. Not everything that was let's say a mystery cult in ancient times. Not everything was psychopathic and criminal and all that, but you can imagine what happens if very powerful people come together and they have very dangerous ideas about how the universe works, and this of course then ties into the intelligence business. And so when we move further to the present, you also have to make, I think, these distinctions between, let's say, some sort of an elite mystery cult from the ancient times that actually survived into our time, something that's very, very elite and very, very secret. And then you have sort of the mid-level occultism, let's say the Aleister Crowley types and various groups of that nature. And even with that mid-level occultism, it's tough to actually track criminal activity, crazy activity, very dangerous activity, and then of course you have the lowest level, I think, of occultism, which is just the dabbling, branching out into various schools of esoteric type systems, and I think this is sort of the baseline structure that people should be aware of, because sometimes dabblers or people who just do this in their spare time, some people, they try to get offended, or they think that it's just not understood what they're doing. But what I've seen is these academics, for example. Academics, they try to be scientific. They go through the source material, and oftentimes source material is what these occultists have written themselves. So the writings of Aleister Crowley, the writings of Helena Blavatsky from Russia, and so on. And you don't imagine these people to write something incriminating on paper. Sometimes they did. But if you just try to be very scientific and academic, going from these original writings, you probably won't get to the bottom of this. I think once you start looking at this like an intelligence officer would look at this, so you're expecting secret nefarious networks to exist and you're trying to track them down, I think this is a much better approach.
I might want to make a comment about to show how occult ideas or religious/occult ideas affect politics. Going all the way back, there is a kind of a common thread. If you go back to Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great's mother told him that he might be half god,
Hmm.
and that his mother had this story about how the night that he was conceived, this godlike spirit, came to her. So he ended up, as he was, he was 18 years old when his father died, Philip of Macedon, and he became the king. And when he had conquered Egypt, he had conquered that part of the Persian Empire. He went out to see a famous, I guess you could call it a psychic. In those days, they would be an oracle. I think it was in some oasis in the desert west of the Nile. And I think you'll find this in Plutarch. And he admitted to his friends, I think one of whom was one of his generals, this story that he's really partly divine, right? And his friends were shocked that Alexander had this belief about himself. And of course, this belief turned out to be quite toxic. In the biography of Alexander the Great, he ended up dying young. Probably, one rumor was he was poisoned by Aristotle because he had murdered Aristotle's nephew, and he had turned against a lot of his friends who knew him as a human being, not as a
Right.
semi-divine. And so then you have this very strange event, this extremely ambitious man, Julius Caesar, who later is an extreme fanatic admirer of Alexander the Great, who, when he comes to Egypt and teams up with Cleopatra, who is a goddess, Isis in the flesh, so to speak, in Egypt, Cleopatra, the descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. Of course, Alexander the Great's tomb was there in Alexandria, and they could go and they could look at Alexander. And of course, looking at Alexander's grave, Caesar's very moved. Here, his mistress is a goddess. Why can't I be a god? And of course, you end up with the deification of the Roman emperors, the deification of Julius Caesar after his death. And you have this cult of personality. You had Hitler in the Third Reich, and you had this cult of personality with Stalin and Mao. This almost deification of the great leader is a real factor in politics, and it has these mystical, semi-religious or occult roots, which is one example of a belief that shows allegiance to a particular leader, to a particular party, and has significance. So that later you have, when the Roman Empire tells the Jews, you have to, have an altar to the emperor, you have to
Right.
swear allegiance to the emperor, and so you have this Jewish revolt, right, where the zealots come out and they're going, we only worship God, we're not going to worship Caesar, right?
And then
So you
Rome
have,
sent its
and the
troops.
Right. And so you have the famous revolt at 68 AD and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So you have this history of wars over these beliefs. So this is not something minor, because the Jewish wars, the two big ones in the Roman history, were extremely important, and they play big now when Israel is reestablished in its old territory, 2,000 years later. And you've got these kind of wars, and you've got a lot of people today. I mean, I had when I put up I linked to the video last week, and they said, was Alex clairvoyant talking about Hamas when that had happened last Saturday, had begun happening, but but we see that this um, this Middle East thing is so volatile religiously, because I had all kinds of people comment on my site quoting Bible scriptures, arguing about who had the right translation of the Bible, for quoting Ezekiel 38 and 39 and talking about Bible prophecy in relation to the events that were unfolding in the Middle East. And of course, this is very similar to all kinds of prophecies in the use of not just religious beliefs, but magical belief in general in influencing groups.
I mean, it's notable, especially in the ancient world, when let's say one empire expanded, and an empire was conquering new territory. So it had a new province, or it just outright claimed a certain bit of land. It was not necessarily standard procedure to just tell these new people that you conquered, to tell them that your entire religious system is bogus and you have to adopt our system. So what happened quite often was that the conquering nation, the conquering empire, was combining its religion with the religion of the acquired territories. And that's how you saw kind of these stories change. If you look into the ancient mystery cults, there's almost 20 variations of every single story. There's 20 variations of every single character in that story. So these stories were constantly adopted and changed. Now, the baseline procedure of these cults, the baseline was always kind of the same. But you could tell pretty much that when, let's say, the Babylonian Empire was expanding, it was suddenly changing these religious stories of the acquired territories, and they were just expanding the role of one of the Babylonian gods and create these family relations of certain god figures. And if we apply that logic,
you could call that a kind of ecumenism, where you're attempting to merge. It's like the Greeks and the Romans. The Romans, when they were taking over the Mediterranean, they began to associate their gods with Greek gods. So they would say that, oh, Jupiter is Zeus, and Venus is I'm not thinking of their name, the goddess of war there in Greece, Athena. So Jupiter is Zeus, Venus is Athena, Mercury is Hermes. This kind of correspondence, so that they were trying to make it into one thing. But what ended up happening a lot of the times, as you mentioned, all these cults, is that there's I think there's 44,000 different types of Protestantism. Well, there's basically 5 types of Protestant, but there's 44,000 different denominations somebody figured out. And the thing is that what you ended up in the ancient world is you had these cults just multiplying like crazy. So you had this chaos of gods that had taken place in the late Roman Empire. And you had at the same time the political authorities wanted to consolidate belief, so that people would they could center that belief in as attending to the legitimacy of the political power.
Right. And this is something I noticed. I noticed recently. This was kind of a small family vacation, so we were in Austria, and we looked at this. These things actually exist over here. They're called torture museums. Okay, so
torture museums.
You never heard of torture museums in the United States?
No, I haven't heard of a torture museum.
No, so basically you're visiting one of the castles, right? Like a very, very old castle, and they have this it's like a halfway converted into a museum. So they tell you about for example, the history of torture and how it compares to today. So they would have all these exhibits there. Like really
the
old
rack that you'd be stretched out on the rack.
All kinds of stuff. Yeah, the most
thumb screws and
the craziest. They have the craziest stuff from all the centuries, and then they have, of course, information about how this relates to the world today. So they actually quote on these information boards, they quote stuff from what the Russians are doing, what's going on in the Muslim world, what's going on in, just everywhere. So so you visit this museum, right? And you look at these exhibits, and I mean, to me it was kind of striking, because in the ancient world, everybody picked their own favorite cult, and they were doing all these rituals, and some of these rituals were not just meant to just beg some benevolent god to help you, or to help your children when they're ill. But sometimes, for the general public, these rituals meant that you were also trying to get the help of a demon. There's this one instance, I think it's from the Roman Empire, where if your child was sick, you were supposed to do this complicated ritual with a pig. You had to dress up the pig in some sort of way, and the pig had to move in a certain way, and the pig was the pig had a little figurine in its mouth, had to carry it around, and then you had to do something else with the figurine. And when it was all said and done, you place the little figure, the little idol, you place it next to your child who's sick in bed, and this is supposed to get the help of an actual demon. So it's not a benevolent entity, it's a demon, but if you do the right magic, you can sort of benefit from the demon's power for a good cause. So this was even common with the average folk. And so just going further down the line in Christian times in Europe, this sort of magic, or ancient magic, this was of course completely illegal. If you were caught performing that sort of magic, the government would come after you, the church would come after you, and they would employ these torture devices to gain more information. Now, if you look at just baseline historical records and baseline historical analysis, they will tell you this was all just misguided and just stupid. But to me, it seemed more like, on a certain level, it was counterintelligence, because we've seen so many occult activities leading up to a revolution. For example, the communist revolution, leading up to the Nazi takeover. The right wing in Europe, and especially in Germany, was very much into the occult. And so I think that in European history, let's say the witch burnings and these investigations and parts of the Inquisition, I think that was also somewhat rooted in counterintelligence, because the governments at the time, they were just concerned that revolutionary networks, they were concerned that these revolutionary networks existed, and they were combining occultism and espionage. And so if the government actually heard about some suspicious activity, they would go in, investigate using every means available, and they were questioning these people. So these torture devices,
of course,
were not just there to elicit a confession. I mean, that did happen quite a bit for intimidation, but it was also a way to extract information. Are you part of a network?
To find out about a deeper network.
Yeah. Are you an occultist? Are you a professional occultist? Do you have a network? Do you have contact people? Are you running any sorts of operations? So I think that was also part of this.
Well, of course, you know that the Inquisition was started on account of a very carefully organized conspiracy / heresy. The Albigensian Crusade was when the Inquisition first started, and it was the Cathar heresy was that the God of the Bible was a sort of demon, a demiurge, or demiurgos, and so this demon that created the world, it created a prison in which where all of our souls are trapped. So their theology was very much opposed to Christianity, although they were infiltrating the church. There were bishops, there were cardinals, there were very high level people belonging to this sect that had infiltrated all over Christendom. And they were particularly strong in the south of France. And so they had to try to stamp it out because it was like a disease. And of course, it is a Gnostic related heresy. It is Gnosticism in a very virulent form. And it wasn't only, for example, Eric Voegelin, who pointed out that Gnosticism was the main countercurrent to Christianity, but and to civilization itself. Going back to ancient, there's more than one form of Gnosticism. There's Jewish Gnosticism, there's Christian Gnosticism, there's pagan Gnosticism, and of course, it's inimical. The beliefs of the system are inimical to any, I guess you could say, civilization or structure-friendly notions. It's somewhat communistic in its belief systems, and has these Manichaean elements, good versus evil, where what everybody else thinks is good is actually evil. Mm-hmm. So there's an inversion of good and evil that takes place in this cult. And it was Carl Jung in his book Aeon who associated this heresy, this Albigensian heresy, with modern communism, saying that communism was modern. Marxism-Leninism was the ultimate form of the same heresy, just brought up to date with modern science and so on. And you could make the claim, Voegelin claimed that Nazism, not National Socialism, was really part of the same general movement. Have you heard some of this before?
It rings a bell, definitely, because I've looked at the common roots of National Socialism and socialism, and it's when for example the Knights Templars were taken down. This was a very important event in history, of course, and so these arrests were made. Of course, many Templars escaped, but those that were arrested were tortured, and then you had these proceedings, and historians have looked at these records now. Obviously, if you just look at the records, it seems kind of it all rings very phony, and this has been interpreted as a baseline power struggle between the French king, the Pope, and the order of the Templars. But if you look deeper, I think this is a much bigger picture that emerges, because it's when you have these people taken as prisoners and you have the option of torturing them, what questions would you ask them? You would ask questions like, where are your hidden assets? Where are your spies? What operations are you running? What are your long-term plans and strategies? So you would ask all these kinds of intelligence questions to figure out what kind of a network the Templars had built, and you would ask them about occult activity and how far this runs, and any secret backers and secret support structures. Those are the questions you would ask. But if you just look at the files that were that are public, the files don't tell you that much. So apparently the accusations were homosexuality, and the accusations were about spitting on the cross, and that was almost in every single case were the same charges. But of course, if they indeed asked real questions back then, real intelligence questions back then, you wouldn't put all this into the official files. So you would run a double system. You would ask the real questions and write down the answers, and then you would have sort of the official documents, the official files, and you just make up some charges and then and file it as such. But I think that there was quite a bit of occultism going on, and this is what the interrogators, I think, were after. And some people wrote books later on about the subject, and I found one of these books in my old university. I think this was even an original print. And so this person who was attached to the Knights Templars, he admitted to certain things. He said, well, yes, with the church investigation, they actually did find secret hidden rooms in the homes of Templars. And these secret rooms were containing certain talismans and such. And also some graves were opened. And again, these weird talisman type objects were found in those graves that did not belong there. So he was admitting to this, but he was downplaying it in the books by saying this was all just a big misunderstanding. But I think what we can witness, if we'll dig a little deeper, was a massive counterintelligence operation and also a, let's say, counter occultism operation.
So, do you think that people would admit to things that weren't true just to get out from under the torture?
Obviously, that's kind of what can happen. And if of course you want to force a confession, you will get a confession most likely. If we look at these people back then as professionals, I think they were going after specific types of information. Now, I don't think that most Templars were in on it, but I think they were looking for specific networks within the
Specifics,
Templars.
yeah. Well, certainly the Cathars were a real thing, and they were a real threat. They were huge. Um, Um, and of course, there's a connection there to Bulgaria. There's a connection there to ancient Persia. Um, and of course, there's a connection if Carl Jung and Eric Voegelin are right. Jung had a very funny way of explaining this. He said the Antichrist is a real force in history. And he said we are living at the time of this Antichrist. And he said that the Antichrist movement is the opposite, is what is. Antichrist is someone who promises the same thing as Christ, that the lion will lie down with the lamb, but he delivers the exact opposite. And that this is what you have with National Socialism and with communism. And he traced these movements, he called them part of this Antichrist movement through history, which he punctuates with the Albigensian movement, and shows how it in the Renaissance you have this occult revival, you have the introduction of metaphysics and the Enlightenment reaction to the wars of religion, and then of course you have the occult revival in the latter 19th century in Europe, and then you have the Nazi and communist movements in the 20th century. And Jung was connecting these things as part of a rising madness in Western society. He was basically saying this is one of the things that I realized when I was doing my book Origins of the Fourth World War, was that people say, oh, you're just all about Golitsyn, you're all about just the Russians did this fake. Well, that's one important data point about the Russians having this plan to fake the collapse of communism, that deception was so big with the Russians. But the bigger thing is that Marx's ideology, and more specifically Lenin, there is a psychology of destructionism in Marx and Lenin. So destruction of the truth at every opportunity. It's like, why did they lie about that? They even lie when it doesn't seem to matter because the truth is the enemy. And then you have weapons of mass destruction. And whenever they do their war thing, and even when they're at peace, communism killed 100 million people by some counts in the 20th century, in China, in Russia, in Cambodia, in Africa. This is a tremendous death toll in peacetime, let alone in wartime. So you look at Ukraine; it's almost senseless. The Ukrainians will bomb a Russian supply depot where they've got howitzer shells stored, and the Russians will counterattack by firing missiles at a gas station in a supermarket or an apartment block. Right, so they're using terror. They're killing civilians. You saw with Hamas, they're killing civilians. It's about destruction, murder. I mean, the Israelis actually, when somebody challenged them on these babies' heads being chopped off, they then published the pictures. I mean, this is it's mind-boggling, right? The evil, but so what I realized was that this counter movement against normal cosmological thinking, a loving God made us, put us here. We've got this structured civilization, and we've got these rules to live by. But they're against all of it. They're against
Very,
God. They're against civilization. They're against society. They want to, the Albigensians, it's like destroy the world, destroy mankind. We got to escape from the world. We got to leave it all behind. It's all evil. Everything that we know as good, they say is evil. And so then you get to Karl Marx and Lenin, and it's just a different way of saying it. When you go to Marx, you go to Hegel's dialectic. It's abstraction, negation, and then you have the synthesis, the new abstraction or the new reality. With Marx, he turns it on its head. As materialism, I mean, if idealism is the true philosophy of behind all true religion and behind all true philosophy, and now they're saying in physics it's true, then materialism is the ultimate lie. So Marx says, no, it's not idea that you start with an abstraction. You start with a concrete in reality, and you negate. You criticize reality. You critique reality, and then that leads to the revolution, to the destruction of
mm,
reality. So you can make a new reality, and you can be the God, the destroyer God, who creates by destroying. And this is when you realize this is what's going on. You look at weapons of mass destruction and weapons of mass deception, and you go, holy crap, this is bad.
yeah, and I noticed this. I noticed this interesting trend. So before the communist revolution, the socialist movement. The socialist movement was full of occultism, and some of these more well-known communists, they were even more open about it. They were writing about it. I think Mikhail Bakunin and some of these guys, they were pretty dark. And so you saw all this occultism going on. Then the revolution is achieved. And once this happened and the new communist government had solidified, they actually made it illegal for the average citizen in Russia, especially in Soviet Russia. They made it illegal for the average citizen to have these occultist groups, to create new groups or to join a group and to have this sort of activity. So it's interesting to see how occultism is being used, and you have the religion, but then it becomes illegal for most because the new government does not want resistance. They want to prevent somebody else using occultism against this new order. And so this occultism survived sort of in the KGB. So there's quite a bunch of interesting anecdotes about people inside the KGB who were quite into the occult. And you have the Lenin mausoleum and all that stuff. But for the average citizen, it was, for a long time, was pretty much forbidden to engage in occult activity. And this changed in 1991. And then it became such a big thing in Russia. And now it seems to have gotten out of control somewhat. And we're getting information out of Russia. They are trying to ban certain groups and make certain groups illegal. They can't make anything illegal overnight because it's such a big phenomenon in Russia. And there were some government and Orthodox officials in Russia fairly recently, and they made this claim that the United States and Ukraine were using occultism, or what they call Satanism, against Russia to conduct acts of sabotage and whatnot. So basically everybody who's fighting the Russian government now, according to Russia, is a Satanist, of course. That's what they're claiming. But it's interesting to see that this phenomenon was out of control in Russia, and now they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle in some way. And this is also something
Well,
I
it's better
noticed.
than a real witch hunt, right? If you really want to find the real witches or find the enemy, you have a witch hunt. Your enemy's going to be found somewhere in there, right?
Yeah,
Make
yeah. But
everybody paranoid, and then if everybody's paranoid, who can get away with anything, right?
exactly. And this is something I also noticed about the National Socialists. the right wing circles in Germany and Austria, as early as the 1800s. I think it really started around 1850. Occultism became such a big thing, and once the Nazis actually took power, there was this order that occultist groups for everybody are now illegal. So the only organizations you can join are National Socialist organizations, and if you were a more powerful Nazi party member, you could get sort of a special permission to engage in occultism, but this was limited to a specific group. But the average citizen was no longer allowed to dabble in occultism. So again, before a revolution.
Yeah, you had something similar in ancient Rome. You had, if you go to the Tacitus or Suetonius about Tiberius. Tiberius was a major consultant of astrologers, and yet they would outlaw astrology. They would outlaw occult practices in Rome, and yet Tiberius would invite astrologers to his place by the coast, and he would take them to the roof of his house, which was on the edge of a cliff, and he would bring them there, and he would have this enormous bodyguard nearby who was given orders to throw the astrologer off the roof if he gave the wrong answer. And of course, he would have the astrologer look at his own horoscope. And if the astrologer didn't see that he was at a crisis point in his life and maybe about to die, he would have him thrown off the roof. But it was like the leaders wanted access to occult and secret information, but they didn't want the public to have it. And they also realized that if an astrologer predicted that the emperor was going to die, it was a serious problem for the emperor, because it might make that prophecy might be self-fulfilling.
Right. So yeah, it's restricted. Sometimes it's very restricted, and sometimes it's used to make people angry, and it's used to get people moving. And when this pattern becomes sort of a thing, right? Using occult groups for espionage purposes and for revolutionary purposes. If this is a known principle, of course, what happens? Intelligence networks, they try to get in on the game, and sometimes intelligence operatives, they will even start these kind of groups. And I think this is what happened with the Golden Dawn and the OTO, for example. So, like this group, the Ordo Templi Orientis (OTO), was created somewhere in Germany or Austria between 1895 and 1906, and it looks like these groups were made for espionage purposes. So you create this organization, and then you expand its activities, you expand what kind of occult systems they're into. So there's something for everybody. And then what these organizations did was they created these new lodges, these new chapters, and then they tried to jump across the border and move into the territory of the competing empires. And then you make connections, and maybe you can recruit sources and all that stuff. So there was this text from Dr. Richard B. Spence from the University of Idaho. He looked at Aleister Crowley, and apparently Aleister Crowley was a British spy who infiltrated the Golden Dawn and also the OTO. And so this was about figuring out these subversive plans, because some of these networks, they try to destabilize Britain, reinstall the Stuart line to the throne, and make Britain Catholic again. So, and for that purpose, there were operations going on in Ireland, and this was always tied to these occult organizations. And what Aleister Crowley did was he would infiltrate these groups, he would gain information, and then he would relay this information to British intelligence. So this is something that I think people should be really, really aware of, how this game was played in Europe at that point in time. There was also some German operations against the United States, And so this was before World War One. I mean, some people may be familiar with this. There was quite a bit of sabotage going on. German agents, German assets, they were trying to blow up anything they could in the United States. Ammunition depots, ammunition factories, anything of any value was attacked. And this was German intelligence behind behind the sabotage. And this is also something that Mr. Crowley had infiltrated. And somebody who was tasked with investigating that sabotage was the infamous John J. McCloy, very mysterious figure who then became, after World War II, he became sort of the man in charge of the occupied territories of Germany. And he did all kinds of stuff. He was scaling up the United States military and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is actual intelligence operations. In this case, it was sabotage against the Americans and against Britain, operations against Britain. And Aleister Crowley, he infiltrated these networks, going through these occult connections. It's just very, very interesting.
It is true, of course, that Crowley kind of invented his own religion, and was and seemed very serious about using occult ideas, which involve, just to explain to the audience, a lot of occult ideas involve systems of correspondence, and it's almost like a schizophrenic use of metaphor to try to invoke supernatural entities or powers or synchronicities, or to cause things to happen. We should just sort of lay that out there, that whatever form of magic or occultism you're looking at, there's always a system of correspondences. Like I was talking about pagan gods, for example, pagan gods being related to different planets, right? You have the planet Venus, you have the planet Mars, you have the planet Saturn. These are names of gods. The sun, Apollo is a god, is the sun god. So you have these correspondences, and all of these also relate to astrological symbols and the zodiac and so on and so forth, so that everything has a correspondence to everything else. And you have systems of symbols that are used, and then the manipulation of those symbols can supposedly change reality, change things in reality. That's just to give a basic explanation. And of course, this was part of what they try to do in these magical rituals. But it also is very funny that there is a political side to this. That also, guess what? Symbols are very important to empires. They're very important to military organizations, and that the manipulation of the symbol. Look at the symbols that Hitler created, the swastika, which had already existed as a symbol, but he had it turned in a funny way. And you have, of course, it's a red flag, just like the Soviet flag is a red flag. He's got a mustache, like Stalin has a mustache. I think it was Viktor Suvorov that pointed out these correspondences so Hitler's niece, who he supposedly had some kind of romantic infatuation with, was killed with his revolver. She supposedly shot himself. Stalin supposedly shot herself with his revolver, and so on. There's this system of correspondences. I guess somebody made something of the fact that Hitler's father at one time was a shoemaker, like Stalin's father was at one time a shoemaker, so on. And both of their fathers beat them, etc. So you have these weird attempts at correspondences, and people find these correspondences to be very spooky. Like I think I mentioned the correspondence between the deaths of President Kennedy and President Lincoln here in the U.S. These correspondences shockingly exist. And what are we to make of that?
Yeah, and so if we put ourselves mentally in the position of if we look back at the Cold War, so how would, for example, how would the Soviets try to infiltrate Western Europe and especially the United States by using occultism, by using occult groups. Now, in America, occultism got a big boost in the 1960s. So with all the new music and the rebellious symbology and all that, and then this Church of Satan was founded, which partially was a publicity stunt, but it was also meant to get people into this further, to make it to create this entry point. It's almost like a front organization for something larger and something bigger. And when the Church of Satan was founded, police then, over the years, police noticed an increase in occultist crime and occultist activity. So it definitely had some sort of an effect. And when people get into this, so they may start with, let's say, the Church of Satan, or they buy this book by Anton LaVey, the Satanic Bible. This may be somebody's entry point, because at some point they have exhausted everything that's in the Satanic Bible, and they want to look further. They want more light, so to say, or more enlightenment in an occult sense. And so then they might start looking at what else is out there. And one thing I noted about the Church of Satan is something I had not been previously aware of, and it's this. So when the Church of Satan was founded, one particular founding member called my attention, and this was the Danish Baroness Karen de Plessen. So she grew up in the royal palace of Denmark. She was born in Copenhagen, Denmark. Very old family, about 1,000 years old. They started out in Saxony, then they moved to Mecklenburg in Germany, northern Germany, and then Denmark, which is a bit further to the north. Denmark and Holstein. And their original place, the original place they controlled, the original place then was under the rule of the House of Hessen-Kassel. So you're talking about some of the most influential old families. These families at some point defined the British throne and also the Russian Tsarist throne. So here we have somebody from a very, very old family, more than 1,000 years old, somebody attached to the throne of Denmark. And it's likely that this person had access to more elite circles, let's say maybe ancient mystery cult type stuff. And so she looks to me like a possible link between an actual elite and then sort of a lower level front organization such as the Church of Satan. So the Church of Satan was not giving away any secrets of the old mystery cults.
So she joined the Church of Satan?
She was a founding member, yeah. A Danish baroness. Founding member of the Church of Satan. A Danish baroness, Karen de Plessen. Yeah. She was a founding member.
Interesting. When I was listening to your piece on it, and I read a little bit about LaVey, his actual statements are very Gnostic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very Gnostic sect. Just as one of my readers connected to this researcher on Islam, and I'd never heard this before, that Islam is officially a Gnostic religion, because they believe that the creator God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, is a demon, or like a demiurgo. So it's like I had not run across that. In all my readings on Islam, I had not seen that before. So there almost is like this line, and Voegelin, people have attacked Voegelin for, everything's about Gnosticism and with you. And he said, look, if I had, and he pointed to these authorities that he was referring to, if I'd come up with this on my own, I'd be the greatest, scholar in the history of the world. But I didn't. Basically, these other people discovered all this stuff about Gnosticism. I'm just connecting it to all these political movements, and he makes a very good point that there is this struggle, and it is Manichaean because Manichaean kind of division of good and evil runs through all of these belief systems. So you've got Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan making it about the devil being a good guy, right? Satan's is actually misunderstood, according to
Yeah.
Anton LaVey. And of course, this brings up something that's that you mentioned about the occult revival in America. If you go to American bookstores, the occult books are in the metaphysical, often they call it metaphysical section, where the UFO books are. And I
Hmm.
should point out, say, well, how would the Russians, how would the Soviets be interested in exploiting these kind of things, especially after World War II? And then you have, right after World War II, 1947, this flying saucer hysteria that begins with Kenneth Arnold sighting UFOs over Washington State from his airplane, to the Roswell crash, 2 weeks later, in at the what is it, the Fulton Ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico, and there's this book by Nick Redfern called "Flying Saucers from the Kremlin," and he's done an amazing research. He kind of gives an offhand. He tries not to sound like a McCarthyist, and he goes back, pedals backwards to try to explain why there was concerns about the communists. But he's got he's looked into the declassified files, and he's found that after this first 2 weeks of incidents of flying saucers being seen everywhere, an FBI special agent named Reynolds went and interviewed Army Air Corps Intelligence Chief General Shulgin, and Shulgin told Reynolds that the first flying saucer reports that kind of triggered the whole thing off were people with communist connections, and that the military was extremely concerned that Soviet agents had been instructed to spread these rumors in order to exploit them, in order to create certain thoughts in people's heads, and even to form organizations, like you say, occult organizations. And sure enough, when you get into the contactees, the people who a few years later claimed that they were talking to aliens, the flying saucers had landed, like George Adamski, again, you find connections to the KGB and to mysterious figures who ended up, on the one hand, they were interested in UFOs, but they ended up spying for the Soviet government, and some of them ended up disappearing
Hmm.
mysteriously, kidnapped, supposedly to meet flying saucer aliens, but probably kidnapped by the KGB because maybe they knew too much, which is all in Nick Redfern's book. And there's more. It's about Roswell and Annie Jacobsen, which I've mentioned before, about Stalin being Annie Jacobsen's interview with an old American scientist, saying Roswell was done by Stalin.
Well, I mean
I mean,
the United States Air Force was very concerned about the UFO activist movement for obvious reasons, because these activists, they would camp out near these military facilities, especially in the desert, where the Air Force was testing experimental aircraft and the first stealth plane and all this stuff, and they were also working on other things. New ways of radio communications and all that sort of stuff. And so these UFO activists, they became quite inventive. So they would not just carry around cameras everywhere. Some of them would actually hop into a small airplane and fly around in the hopes of finding a wrecked, crashed airplane. And so there's this book out. It's called Mirage Men. I think this was even turned into a documentary. And so this kind of tells you part of that whole history. And this one guy, I think it was Benevitz. He was becoming obsessed with this UFO topic, and he was flying around in a plane and he was photographing something that could have been an experimental aircraft. And so the Air Force then decided to work him. They kind of made him believe he was on the right track and it was UFOs and aliens, and he ended up insane. He had a mental breakdown of some sort. And something else that the Air Force was doing, especially the what they call FOC, the special branch of the Air Force, they would spread false documents, give them to these UFO activists, and in exchange they would demand actual intel from these UFO activist circles. So this is kind of this thing what you just mentioned. You make up phony intelligence, you make up phony stuff, and then you trade it for something real. So some of these UFO activists, they became quite famous. They had these best-selling books, and they were putting information in these books that was supposedly secret. They had the special documents. They were becoming famous for it, but in exchange, they had to give the Air Force actual intelligence. What was going on in the UFO movement? Who had new information? Who had new photographs? Who may have a source in government telling them something? And so this became this wild cat and mouse game in UFO circles, and it's that was basically the motivation of the Air Force, because they were afraid that the Russians would actually infiltrate these UFO guys, and this would have been, of course, the obvious choice for the Russians to do so.
Yeah, the UFO thing. Look at the Stephen Greer and the UFO disclosure movement. What are they really trying to do? They're trying to get access to U.S. military secrets, secret weapons, new technology, cutting-edge physics. The claiming that these things are derived from crashed UFOs, which is what we're hearing. And of course, there's a problem here. Stephen Greer, you talk about occultism. He has this protocol. He gets people to come to his camps or whatever they are, his events, and to learn to meditate, to communicate with the saucers. And the people sit around and they summon, by meditating, they summon UFOs to appear in the sky, right? Does this sound like contact with real aliens, or does this sound like occultism?
Yeah. And of course, as you said, you go into a bookstore and you find that's a special section, and you get esoteric books, occult books, you get UFO books, and you get maybe some conspiracy books. This is all sort of tied together. People are into usually all of these things, most oftentimes, and it's the easiest way to have sort of an experience, right? The easiest way is to take psychedelic drugs, and this has become fairly popular even in right-wing circles. In Europe, in the United States, so for example, you see a heavy influence in Western Europe of these Russian guys like Alexander Dugin. So they tell people to connect to the past and have these experiences. And in the United States, the parts of the right wing in America, they are getting heavily into psychedelic drugs. So you see all kinds of famous people now.
That's surprising. Is this happening in Germany too?
Oh yeah, sure. It's coordinated basically. It's
So of course the psychedelic drugs. I know the rock group The Doors, right? It's the Doors of Perception, and so the idea is you use psychedelic drugs to open the doors to the other dimension, the other world, to the world beyond. And then you can communicate with them. What is it you're communicating with? Spirits, angels, demons. What is it that they're trying to do by taking psychedelics? They're trying to access power?
Yeah, and something that always pops up in UFO activist circles is this idea of interdimensional beings. So this is supposedly how these aliens cross through the universe, and they actually manage to travel these insane distances. They have sort of this cheat code. They are so advanced they can just switch between dimensions. And of course, there's legitimate research about multiple dimensions. But
so basically, the aliens just they take the shortcut here through hell.
Something like that, yeah. And so some people who are practicing occultism and who are also into this UFO alien stuff, it's interlocked. It's really interlocked. And so if people get into this movement, psychedelic drugs inevitably will increase the plasticity of your brain. And that means you are more willing to accept new ideas or to reinforce ideas that you already had. So back in the old days when the CIA was experimenting with psychedelics, especially LSD, they were also testing many other substances, and they had different ideas what substances can do for intelligence purposes. And usually what these books on the matter talk about is they were hoping for a truth serum. And at some point, LSD was a candidate for a possible truth serum. But of course, this didn't pan out. But what the researchers were able to find out was that you can increase somebody's plasticity of the brain, and you can just pour your propaganda into this person, and this propaganda will have a more lasting effect. Now, when the CIA was basically done with LSD, and they had no longer any real interest in it, this is when, of course, the 1960 rock movement or hippie movement, they were getting into LSD, and this sort of created this impression in mainline America that these sort of drugs would turn you into a leftist person. But as it turns out, you can use these kind of drugs to create any sort of ideological person. So nowadays, it's the green movement that's getting into psychedelics quite a bit. Everybody is sort of trying this. And it's when the propaganda is dangerous, of course, then it becomes like a real problem. And I see this all the time. People are interested in baseline standard conspiracy media. They're also interested in UFOs and aliens. They're interested in occultism, and they're also pro-Russian. So this happens quite a lot, and you do have to think of.
Thing. Yeah, that's the thing that bothers me, is how often when I listen to Stephen Greer, you've got almost a peacenik. We're going to get free energy from the alien technology, and free energy is anti-capitalist, right? The capitalists, we've had the secret of free energy, and the evil capitalists have kept it all away from us. And it's very funny. If somebody had a free energy device, they're supposedly always going to be murdered. But the problem is well, where's the proof of this device? When has anybody really demonstrated it? And of course, this is where you get into this conspiracy literature, and it's like it's tailor made for the communists, and it has this Gnostic, the system is bad, the man is against you, God is the devil, evil is good, and good is evil. Again, this theme emerges on top.
Mm-hmm. And something I noticed as well when it comes to this UFO activist movement. To me, it's sort of a parallel to what empires did in the ancient world. I mentioned this earlier. When you try to combine different nationalities, you try to combine these different peoples that you've conquered, you have to combine their religions. So you just make up connections that didn't exist before. You sort of tell the story that it's always been interconnected. It's always been like this one thing, and so if we apply this sort of concept to the alien UFO movement, it looks like somebody is trying to create a common thread and connect different types of religions. Tie them together, and also it seems to be designed to get people back into the sort of religion game, people who have dropped out, people who have been disappointed in religion. And so by introducing this idea of these aliens who supposedly created us or co-created us, and these aliens, we have to listen to them, they are our masters, our spiritual masters, and we have to serve them. So this is how you can create a common thread and try to please everybody. So I've heard these interpretations that that Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and all other religions, this idea that they sort of derive from alien visitation. And so the miracles and all these things are interpreted as alien technology. And so
Erich von Däniken.
Erich von Däniken, so we all have the same thing in common. And even if you're bored by regular religion, I think many people who got into this UFO stuff, and this ties into this Erich von Däniken stuff about the old pyramids and that sort of thing, that the aliens did this. It gets people back into this religious game. So you get these people back who have been, who grew disinterested in religion. And so you tie this all together. And by creating this sort of hybrid monstrosity of a cult, who is in charge of this cult? Well, it appears that, well, one, it's these influencers, specific people who are the authoritarian voices of the movement. They are sort of in charge. But then, of course, what about governments that, for example, pretend they have special alien contacts and knowledge? So let's play this. So let's run this scenario in our heads. So what if the Russians stage things? What if the Russians have convinced people that they have a special connections to the aliens? So it's always a question of who is running this cult. Who can define what people are supposed to do? Because if I read some of these UFO books, for example, it's the one by Richard Dolan. So this guy was. I was told that he wrote
He's a UFO historian, basically.
Yeah. He's supposed to be very scientific, and he's giving you
he's a professor.
All these examples. And so I was reading the second volume of his 2-volume series of alien visitation, alien crashes, and there's no interpretation yet from him in those books. He did this other book, and people were apparently somewhat disappointed by this other book, because in his 2-volume series, he doesn't really give us any idea who these aliens are, what they want. Are they a threat? Are they of any help? What's the end game? What's going on here? So this is sort of the area where it will be decided who is running the movement, or who is able to steer the movement in a certain direction. Because if people believe in it, and there's an authority saying we have proof, we have the special connection, are people going to follow that authority?
Yeah, I read volume 1 of Dolan's thing, so you read volume 2, but then I skipped ahead and I read he wrote 2 speculative books. One was about breakaway civilizations and this technology, and the other was about aliens and what their agenda might be. And what you learn from this is the guy has very left-wing, he's sort of a typical American left-wing professor. And so he has these views, which Voegelin would call Gnostic, basically. He doesn't like the system. He doesn't like capitalism. He doesn't like the Pentagon. He doesn't like the military-industrial complex. So all of these evaluations enter into his way of writing, his interpretation. So he then goes and he accepts that there are aliens, and he accepts that there's this big U.S. government cover-up, which there may or may not be, when the evidence is so ambiguous, and when, as you say, this intelligence game is going on. And he does not by any means accept that there's anything wrong with the Soviet Union, or that we had a really dangerous situation, that Russia and China are still dangerous today, that this is sort of part of an ongoing game. He doesn't look at any of that. And it seems to me, someone like a researcher like Jacques Vallée, who does look at that, and who wrote UFOs in the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, and saw there was some strange things going on and the Russians were engaging in deception, is much superior to Dolan, because Dolan has an axe to grind. He is a lefty. And that's disappointing, because when you read someone, you want them to be objective.
Yeah.
and you want them to be aware of the pitfalls and the dangers, because there is a, I want my country to survive, of course, but I want to be objective. I want to be true about what is real and what isn't.
Oh, by the way, because you talked about this this idea that alien civilizations are much more advanced than we are, and these alien civilizations are supposedly, yeah, like a communist system. So I mean, every time you look at somebody's idea of these aliens, or you watch a movie that's based on let's say UFO literature or that stuff, it's always that these aliens are that these aliens have sort of a communist system. So it's not about the individual, and they have surpassed any notion of capitalism and individualism. And this is something you find over and over and over again. So, for example, when the famous director James Cameron, when he was making the sequel to the 1979 movie Alien by Ridley Scott, when the sequel was done in 1986, people noticed a very strong undertone of communism in Cameron's movie. And Cameron even admitted to that. He was sort of getting his idea from the Viet Cong, right? So apparently in James Cameron's mind, the Viet Cong were the communist Viet Cong were the liberators, the underdogs. They didn't think in individualistic terms. They were not capitalist. They were just focused on the goal and the common mission. And in the movie, you see these colonial marines, as they are called, and they represent, in the movie, they represent everything that America is supposedly about. So the driving force is a corporation, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, but the government is partnering with them. They're sending these colonial marines to this planet that is supposed to be colonized by humans, because there's an alien outbreak in the colony. So then these colonial marines move in, and they're very gung-ho, and they think they can squash the enemy, squash those aliens. But this low-tech alien enemy is pretty much defeating the American military force. And this was a clear parallel to James Cameron's interpretation of the Vietnam War. So the low-tech guys, supposed freedom fighters, they beat the mechanized American capitalist superpower. And so, yeah, this was one movie depiction of, let's say, communist guerrilla aliens, so to say. And there's many, many more examples. I mean, Cameron always tried to be a communist, but he spectacularly failed because he created so much business for the movie studios. And yeah, he was kind of pro-gun for a while. I mean, he was really fascinated by firearms and those things. And there's always some sense of his movies always have some real focus on families. Even his 1986 movie Aliens, there's also a very interesting undertone about families. So he tries so desperately to be a communist, and even these aliens are communist. And this is sort of what you can find over and over.
Terminator movies. Same thing in the Terminator movie. I mean, he ends up, the Terminator is taken from that whole movie. The idea of it's taken from the 12th chapter of the Book of Revelation. People don't realize that. You have you have the Satan trying to devour basically the Virgin Mary before she can give birth to Christ. So you have John Connor, JC, is about to be given birth by his mother, Sarah Connor, right? And so the monster, the robot, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator character comes through a time machine back to kill the mother of its enemy. Well, this is straight out of the Bible. So Cameron has
Interesting.
taken something a lot of people didn't realize what it was, and of course, you have almost a recreation of the Holy Family in its own way
Hmm.
in Cameron's twisted kind of version of it. And of course, it makes it because he's using these religious symbols, which may not be conscious in people's minds. He's actually reaching this larger audience. Um, and of course, he's talking about apocalypse, about a nuclear kind of apocalypse. Only robots, demonic, satanic AI are taking over everything. What is it called? Skynet.
Hmm.
But what is disturbing about fiction is where the left wing themes were more subtle, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now it's just overtly in your face, woke propaganda, like the morning show about how all these feminist women heroes promoting abortion, killing babies, as if that's a heroic, smuggling abortion pills over the Mexican border is a news story that
Hmm.
deserves to be covered, and it's so heroic, making people who are promoting abortion into heroes. It's so strange to me that this is in, of course, one of the major characters who's supposedly from a Christian conservative, West Virginia family that's, of course, very dysfunctional and full of alcohol and drug abuse. She becomes a lesbian.
Hmm.
These kind of sensational, um, but very Gnostic themes to show that everything's dysfunctional and this world is bad and we have to revolt against it. And we have to, and the truth is that everything is wrong and we have to turn everything upside down to make it right side up. I mean, this is the theme
Yeah, and the
again and again,
aliens,
over
the
and over.
aliens will solve all our problems. They will solve all these questions, apparently. And I think even George Lucas with his Star Wars movies, I think he even shared the same the historic view with James Cameron. I think that on some level, the rebels in Star Wars are also based on some communist movements, liberation movements, and the evil empire. The evil empire in Star Wars is based on many things. For example, the National Socialists, but also people notice, of course, that these empire officers, they're talking in a very posh British accent. So this is a clear jab at the old British Empire. And so on some level, you can interpret it as, well, the rebels in Star Wars, they're like the American rebels, gaining liberty from the British Empire. But in some interviews, George Lucas actually betrayed some very, very left-leaning interpretations of history. And there was another example. It was the original Alien movie by Ridley Scott from 1979. It was more subtle. I admit that, but sprinkled throughout the movie, Alien, are these capitalist logos from the company, the corporation Weyland-Yutani, and so this corporation wants to get this alien specimen for bioweapons research to make money. And the crew is expendable. They sent the crew to this planet. They get infected with this alien specimen, and the company wants that the specimen is returned back to Earth. So this is sort of the spaceship in the movie is sort of a microcosm. So you have the captain who probably makes the most money, and he has to be the liaison between the higher-ups in the company and the workers on the ship. Then you have sort of below the captain, you have the communications people and the sort of the other officers, and below that you have the mechanics. So in the movie logic, the mechanics, they're paid the least amount of money. And you see this sort of weird class warfare going on in this stupid spaceship. And then it becomes this bigger, sort of this bigger class warfare. And yeah, and the main character then blows up the entire ship, so destroying all this value to the company and also destroying this alien organism. So
Because she basically, the science officer who was an agent of the government was really a robot who you find out when she has a fight with him,
Hmm,
and she tears off his arm or whatever, and this white fluid comes out, and he's just a machine.
yeah,
Um,
and he admires
but
the aliens. He admires the
yeah, he
aliens
admires
for
them. Yeah, they're
what does he call
perfect.
it? I admire its purity. He says. He's
Something like that. Yes, yes.
unclouded by delusions of morality. This is almost like an occultist view. You know, you want to be a highly elevated type of creature that is not clouded by illusions of morality. That was
Uh,
um, one of the creations of the company. This artificial human being, this android, and later
yeah,
Ridley Scott made the sequel movie, which he called Prometheus. And this is almost like taken out of the old books by Erich von Däniken. So the story is these alien engineers, they created us or co-created us. And once humanity evolved and created spaceships, the humans, they wanted to go into space and find these engineers to gain access to these secrets and eternal life and all this stuff. So basically become like the gods or become at least as powerful as these aliens who created us. So that was then the sequel movie.
yeah, and of course, the themes we find in ufology are almost taken from bad science fiction. So much of it. If you look at Stephen Greer, it's almost impossible with the disclosure movement. The things he talks about are almost they are so. I wrote a piece about this a few months back. It is so bad, and of course, he's been accused of lying and distorting, and he's got a rather checkered past actually himself in making claims that are not true. Um, and so this is the real tee off that you're looking at disinformation when you're looking at information that's been cooked,
Yeah, I
and it's
mean,
been cooked with a logical
what's
agenda. Yeah.
what many of these activists are saying is that they are really world-class investigators. So they are the ones who expose the secret. They are spy masters. They have sources. They acquire bits of intelligence. They recruit sources, or they get contacted by sources, and so they're claiming nothing less than being world class, spies, intelligence people. And when I look at the material they put out, the stuff that was popular in the 80s that was then turned into a television show, The X-Files, with the FBI agents Mulder and Scully, and then the stuff in the 90s, there was in the 90s stuff, and then Cooper's book came out, Behold a Pale Horse, which was sort of heavily into this alien stuff, and of course now this book this 2-volume series by Richard Dolan. When I look at this material, I see that they do not possess the expertise of an intelligence person, an intelligence officer, a spy. So in my opinion, they're making all these mistakes. They are, especially Dolan, he's absolutely convinced that he's on the right track. And even if many, many things get exposed as fake, or it gets exposed that the United States Air Force was infiltrating the movement and supplying false documents, and these documents were hailed as real, even when these, let's say, intelligence failures happen, they don't really learn from it, these activists. So they always go back to this standard procedure. They say, well, if this thing was fake, it shows that the government tries to spread disinformation. Therefore, there must be something real behind it. Or they claim this exposed fake piece of evidence was based on real evidence, or it's just a mix. It contains some truth, and the person who was leaking it, he had to put in false stuff. So it's just this generic response that is repeated over and over and over again,
Right.
and
It's bad
yeah.
analysis.
Yeah, and never after
Bad analysis.
all these failures, never did they actually improve their methods. Never did they actually change the way they handle intelligence. You know, like
Well,
this.
Jacques Vallée is an exception. See, the thing that is confusing is there is a reality. There has always been inexplicable phenomena. You know, whether you're talking about the history of psychism, you know, the different psychic research organizations. I've experienced, for example, spontaneous telepathy, where I was driving in a car with somebody who was quite angry, and I knew there wasn't a left-hand turn lane, and I knew he was going to get backed up, and we were going to be late for lunch, and I kept thinking in my head, get in the left lane, get in the left lane now, you know. And he turned to me and he looked at me and he said, why did you tell me to, he changed lanes, and then he said, why did you tell me to get in the left lane? And I hadn't said it, I'd only thought it. So I've had, you know, people have those experiences. My grandmother had the experience of dreaming her sister Clara's death in Elgin, Illinois, the night that her sister Clara died in childbirth. And she had the dream. She nightmare really woke up, told my grandfather, you know, Sister Clara's dead. He said, no, it's just a dream. In the morning, they got the telegram. Now they were in British Columbia. They were in a different country. And she had the dream. So people in their families, they have these experiences. And as I said about the Kennedy Lincoln synchronicities, there is this dimension of reality that's real. And of course, what these intelligence services and these conspirators in strategy, using their groups to get advantage, is they play off of the reality, which is a mystery that we don't understand. And through the centuries, nobody's really understood any of this. They play off of it, claiming that they have the answers, that they know what the answers are, and that if you join us, you'll know the answer too, and that we're the winning side, blah, blah, blah. And of course, if it's, as you pointed out, with revolutionary movements, with subversive movements, to undermine the status quo is to say the government is in a conspiracy to hide this brilliant truth from you, the truth about aliens, the truth about God, the truth about the devil. You know, the devil's really a good guy, they might be telling you, like Anton LaVey. And these are, you could say that these are all intellectual weapons in this form of warfare that has not been that well understood by historians or the people that study these very subjects.
Sometimes I get activists, UFO activists, who get mad at me and they claim, why do you always mix this together? You know, the alien stuff and the UFO stuff. And they claim they're only interested in the UFO sightings or perceived sightings. So I usually suspect that these people are really into aliens, but they're not necessarily open about it. They just want to get people into this by using these perceived sightings and these stories that are being told by various people. And so once they get people into this UFO thing, they can then get them deeper into what they believe about aliens. Because at the end of the day, why would this supposed UFO phenomenon, why would it be relevant unless it has something to do with aliens, and the aliens would either have to be a threat to us, a significant threat, or they can help us in a significant way. Because if they're not an enemy to us, if they're not a threat to us, and they can't really help us, so what's the point of them? You know, this would be really of no use to us. So I'm trying to look at this from the standpoint of what do people think they can get out of this, or do people see this as a threat? Now, I mentioned this before. who's running this movement, or who is really running the key ideas of the movement. Who are these aliens? Why are they visiting us? What's their plan? And if they are a threat, then of course the question is, who can protect us from this threat? Maybe the Russians can protect us. And
Nobody.
maybe this is one day some Russian or some influencers will actually claim that your best hope is Russia to save you from the aliens.
That's possible.
And the other scenario, if the aliens are of great help to us, then this help might be conditional. So we have to give them something in order to get, let's say, the fancy new technology or whatever. So what do we have to give them? Who is going to define, or who is going to tell us what the price is for this help?
The disturbing narrative that I noticed in the UFO literature is that more and more among the people who believe in aliens and believe that there's this definite government secrecy by the U.S. is this claim that's very alarming that the U.S. government has a treaty with aliens and that they're collaborating, but not with just any aliens. They're collaborating with the evil aliens, the ones that are going to do something bad to humanity, are going to enslave humanity. And of course, who would, you when you hear some piece of nonsense, you think, well, who benefits by this? Cui bono is the big question always. Who's benefiting by this piece of nonsense? And it's like, well, yeah, Russia and China, because if you get a bunch of American citizens really upset that their government is collaborating, if they believe in UFOs and they believe their government is collaborating with evil aliens, then the real problem is the U.S. government. The U.S. government is a threat to mankind because the U.S. is collaborating with evil aliens who have some sinister idea in mind for the future of humanity. So therefore, these disturbed UFO true believers could work with Soviet intelligence, could work with Chinese intelligence to save humanity from this evil American government that's coordinating with these evil aliens. This kind of narrative, it's no joke. It's really out there in the UFO literature.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed something this was an old interview that was conducted by a reporter from the Rolling Stone magazine, and he was interviewing Anton LaVey from the Church of Satan, which I just realized had a founding member from a 1,000-year-old family. And so this interviewer was asking LaVey, are you aware that you are creating problems, you are creating chaos if you tell everybody they can be like God, or they should act as if they were much more than a human? Are you aware that this will cause problems? And LaVey admitted that yes, he plays to people's egos, and this has negative consequences. But in his logic, we are already in a phase of decline, a phase of destruction. So the only thing reasonable to do is to accelerate this destruction. You accelerate this decline so you can just get it over with. And by telling people to behave in a certain way, he thought he could bring in this new age, so to say, and sort of this is kind of a baseline occultist logic. So you're supposed to just have fun, be focused on your own interests, and even if this damages other people. I mean, he talked about how much he hated people. He talked about this for hours, this reporter said. And so if we draw a parallel from this occult strategy, right? Instead of building things, instead of fixing things, instead of repairing things and creating things, you're supposed to destroy and you're supposed to cause more problems. If we apply this to some of these alien narratives, I mean, some people may interpret that alien agenda as this is going to be like this big war, maybe this big fight against the aliens, and once this is done, there will be something new, a new world. or maybe the good aliens beat the bad aliens, and after the storm is over, we can all live in this happy communist system, and we get free energy and free everything.
Yeah, that's pretty much how they do it, and of course, people are so susceptible to this um, because, as I mentioned before, what you just said, Karl Marx had this. His whole formula is concrete reality: criticize it, criticize it, then destroy it. Because your criticism, and that's how you create, by destroying. And it fits with a poem that Marx wrote when he was in university. He wrote a poem in which he said that he could be the equal of God who created the world. He could be his equal if he could destroy the world and
Yeah.
mankind. And
Yeah, this was in
that,
the
I'm
movie. This
afraid,
was in the movie Prometheus, by the way. This was in Ridley Scott's movie Prometheus. So the same engineers that created us, they want to destroy us with this black liquid that can destroy us. And so only if you can
um,
destroy something are you this thing's master.
and of course Marx had a special thing that he said about Prometheus. Marx liked Prometheus. He favored Prometheus. Prometheus, of course, in Greek mythology, gave man fire, and but Prometheus was more famous for saying, "I hate the gods. Why do you give man fire? Because I hate the gods." Right?
Hmm.
Despite the gods. And so there's something about, sticking your finger in God's eye, being opposed to God, being opposed to heaven. Um, this is very definitely built into modern socialism and the revolution. And if people want to know why it ends in murder and mayhem and destruction and nothing really positive comes out of it, I think that you have your reason right there.
Yeah, I mean, Marx's idea was that capitalism will inevitably cause capitalism will only cause damage and war and misery and destruction. So, um, if we look at the first Alien movie by Ridley Scott, this seems to me like it's going in sort of the same direction because it becomes sort of the main plot point in the course of the movie Alien from 1979. It becomes imperative to destroy this organism before it reaches Earth, and it's the same thing in the sequel by James Cameron, because these aliens reaching Earth, that would be like the last stage of capitalism, because a capitalist corporation, Weyland-Yutani, and its complicit government, they would be responsible for bringing these deadly aliens to Earth, and that would destroy humanity. So that would fulfill the prophecy of Marx that capitalism will destroy everything in the end. And so this is kind of an interesting
Yeah,
parallel.
yeah, it is. Well, we see the dialectical formula of concrete reality: criticize it, destroy, and then you blame your victim. That's the other part they don't talk about. Is that you're basically going out to victimize the people that exist, the system that exists. Human beings are not perfect. Any political system we make is not perfect. But you read all of history and you see how amazing a modern civilization is, what its achievements are, the extreme humanity of it, um, as opposed to earlier ages where there was no concern for the individual, no concern for the plight of the poor, for example. We have more of that. Modern philanthropy, especially in America and Great Britain, has been tremendous. The sympathy, the empathy that people have, that wealthy people have had in the West, and especially in the Anglosphere. Yet none of that is credited. The whole thing is rotten. It has to be dragged down.
Hmm.
For what? For what they have in China. I think a friend of mine who lived in China a couple of years, she said, when she went to China, they have one expression for people who are in distress. It's you hold out your hand and you go like this.
Hmm.
People, we're not going to help. We're not going to help you. Um, and in Russian society too, there is this misanthropy that you don't find in the West. And we see it, like I say again, in the Ukraine war. We see it in China's treatment of Tibet and the Uyghurs, in China's readiness to threaten the most horrible consequences to any country that dares to do anything against them, even to acknowledge the existence of Taiwan. And of course, Russia's been threatening nuclear war ever since it claimed the right to invade the second largest country in Europe and annex it. Um, it's just monstrous. And yet, our media, our culture insists that we are the monsters, that anyone that approves of the military industrial complex that defends us, that
Mm.
defends our liberty, has kept us alive against Russian nuclear rockets for all these years, that they're somehow the prime evil on the planet, that the CIA, the gang that could never shoot straight, is behind every single conspiracy and every bad thing that happened from Roswell to the Kennedy assassination to well, maybe the CIA was the snake in the Garden of Eden.
They
You
sank the
know, I mean,
Titanic,
they
and
sank the Titanic. Sure, it was the iceberg. The
they,
iceberg was the CIA guy was inside the iceberg,
it's a
right?
holographic
So it,
iceberg. And no, but this is
yeah,
something. Yeah, you just mentioned this thought that that this thing that is propagated, that humans are the monsters. If you watch James Cameron's movie Aliens, there's sort of this underlying respect that is being shown, this underlying respect to these aliens. So, for example, these colonial marines, and they represent the military-industrial complex, right? So these colonial marines, they go in, they think it's an easy operation, they think it's an easy task. At first, they're very, very enthusiastic, and they're very full of themselves. But when the situation becomes really dire and dangerous, the Marines sort of fall apart. So they become individuals. They kind of turn on each other. One of them just gives in to fear. And and there's this one corporate guy who is trying to sell them all out and try to get the specimen home. So the humans are scheming against each other. And there's this one moment where the main character, Lieutenant Ripley, she has this line where she compares the humans to these aliens. And she says, well, at least these aliens don't screw each other over for a percentage. And this was sort of a really strong hint that in the movie, sort of these aliens are almost like the real heroes of the movie, right? Because they are this rare species, and they're selfless. These selfless, almost communist ideal, selfless warriors. They will sacrifice themselves for the collective. There's this one scene that was not in the cinematic version, but was later put back into the director's cut. It's this moment where the colonial marines, they put up these automatically targeting guns, these sentry guns, and they put them into this hallway. And so they stare at these monitors where they can observe how much ammo is still left in these systems, and they expect an attack from these aliens. And so they hear the gunfire, and the ammunition counter goes lower and lower and lower, but these aliens, they keep coming and coming and coming and coming. So they are the ideal of the communist fighters who will sacrifice themselves for the collective, whereas the humans, they turn on each other, and they're individualistic, and they're not the
they're
same.
not perfect warriors. No.
No.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, is that the alien that is the threat to human life is really the good guy. And of course, that reminds me, there was a communist I knew in graduate school. He was very high up in the academic system. And he basically decided he didn't even like communism anymore. He thought humanity should be extinct. He just thought humanity should cease to exist. That became his final statement, that humanity was not worth saving. Um, and you think about this. I think about, of course, Soren Kierkegaard's um, "The Sin of Despair," um, which he wrote in one of his books. The sin of despair is really the opposite of faith. Despair and faith are opposites. So you have the book of Job, and it seems to me very important that in the book of Job they say, well, God has done all these horrible things to you, just curse God and die, and Job won't do that. And that is, to me, the ultimate statement is that you have faith that God is going to make everything good in the end, and that it's all going to somehow be worth it, that we're here for a reason, and even though we don't understand what that reason is, our job is to endure. And the Gnostic position, the position of despair is, no, don't endure, curse God and die. Nothing here is worth anything. It's all for nothing. And that is the nihilism that really underlies National Socialism, communism, and all of these, you could say, heresies and really, quite frankly, brutal approaches. And this brutality, as you just pointed out, is in our movies. It's in our science fiction especially, but it's in all of these really sophisticated dramatic presentations. In fact, there's a series. I think they're children's books, and I saw the series on HBO, which is a completely Gnostic thing, and it's got interdimensional travel between our reality and this other reality, this alternate reality, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but it really has all these themes built into it, and it's very anti-Christian, particularly in its message. But this is the thing that they're pushing on everyone now. This is the theme.
Yeah, and it's over here in Europe. I mean, quite a few right-wing extremists are into this UFO stuff, especially tied to the Nazi era. I mean, there's been so many myths that have been created. The flying saucer program of the Nazis, and these occult programs to find secret hidden places, these occult places in, I think it was India, these expeditions that were done. And also this idea that Hitler was channeling spirits from a specific planet, and we could actually visit this planet, or these beings can visit us. So there's a lot of mythology that was created back in the day, and also after World War II. And I noticed something. I noticed a specific connection to the United States as well.
Well, it's in the Grush testimony, actually. They've brought that in the Grush testimony, the stuff that the first alleged UFO captured by the U.S. government was handed over by Mussolini. And they had apparently it crashed from some kind of test in Munich, Germany.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Back in 1932, even before the National Socialists took power in Germany, which is bizarre.
So somebody could be throwing a bone. Somebody could be throwing a fake bone towards a certain crowd in the audience. And I saw this thing when the Church of Satan in America became a thing, and it was tied into, of course, the 1960s rock music movement. People in the Church of Satan, they at some point, fairly quickly, people had exhausted what the church could offer. And so they were looking at all these other places. And so you had offshoots, and then they were creating even more offshoots. And this is sort of where the connection comes into the Nazi UFO stuff, how this was, or how even occultist, Nazi or even German occultism, how this was brought to America in a larger way. So, for example, first you had Michael Aquino, who founded his own group, the Temple of Set. This was a clear.
That Aquino story is weird because, again, he was involved in psychological warfare operations.
Exactly,
in the US military.
And of course, by naming it the Temple of Set, this was, of course, a a clear connection to ancient mystery cults. So it was not this baseline black robes, pentagrams, and candles and stuff, but it was more connected to the actual past. And I've mentioned this baroness from Denmark, from this 1,000-year-old family. This baroness who was a founding member of the Church of Satan, and she may have been sort of a connecting person between the real elite cults and something like the Church of Satan. And so,
and of course, I should point out that that the infiltration of the Masonic movement by the communists goes way back. In fact, it even goes back further than what we find mentioned in Julius Evola, the recent biography of Julius Evola, that he was working for the SS. They were gathering information on the Masonic and occult lodges in Europe. They were stockpiling it in Vienna, and of course, the Soviet army captured it. But the Soviets recognized that these aristocratic groups and these cults were the key to their infiltration of Europe as far back as the 1920s, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Especially this Evola guy. His stuff is being read today. I mean, he always had one comeback after the other. So the French right wing was, I think they were rediscovering him in the 70s, and then he was rediscovered again in the 80s and the 90s, and people nowadays, they're rediscovering him again. So
and
all
Steve Bannon likes him.
Yeah, Bannon likes him, and many of these new right-wing guys, they are into psychedelics, and there's a study on this I found recently. I can quote this in the movie in the video description. There's a study on how many people in the right wing are actively promoting the use of psychedelics, and so this Michael Aquino guy. He became interested in Nazi occultism, and so in 1983 he performed a ritual at the subterranean section of the infamous Wewelsburg Castle in Germany, which was also utilized as a ceremonial space by the Schutzstaffel's Ahnenerbe group during the Nazi period, and this ritual resulted in his formation of the Order of the Trapezoid, a Setian offshoot group whose members understood themselves as a chivalric order of knights. So he's taking you around the world, it seems, right? So it started with the Church of Satan, which was this baseline, pentagram, inverted cross stuff. Then the Temple of Seth, going back to the ancient world. And then he brings us to the Nazi occultism, and then he's going back to the older centuries with the Knights and these sort of orders. I mentioned the Knights Templars, and the big question of who was trying to find out what the Templars were into or may have been into, and So then the story continues from 1987 through until 1995. The Grand Master of the Order of the Trapezoid was Edred Thorson, real name Stephen Flowers. So he had studied academic runology at the University of Göttingen in Germany under Klaus Duvel, and so these leading academics there. And so in 1978, Flowers joined the Asatru Free Assembly, the largest neo-völkische organization in the United States. So this is one of the connections where they bring this stuff from Europe to America. And to the Americans, Germany, or especially Europe in general, seems ominous and very, very mysterious, right? Because this is reflected in all the horror movies. Anything German, anything European is viewed as very, very sinister. And some of this European stuff then made its way to United States East Coast. I think the Salem stuff, for example. This was in New England or something.
Salem witch trials.
So
Is
this
that
was
what
this
you're
was like
referring
this
to?
was like New England type area.
In the late 17th century, what happened? Um, Cotton Mather, who was a famous clergyman, his letters were very famous. There was a an old washerwoman in she was Irish, and she was insulted by a couple of girls in the community there in Boston. And this old Irish lady put a hex on her, on these two girls. They started vomiting nails and pins. They would, I forget whether they levitated or not, but they went through horrible, it was like a possession, demonic affliction kind of thing. And the community there, they'd never seen anything like it. They were Puritans, of course, and they wrote to Europe, where, of course, there had been experience with witch trials and so on. And they didn't want to execute this old woman for doing this, but they did, and they were beside themselves. And Mather was a traveling preacher, and he came back and he said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This can't be happening." And then he interviewed the two girls that were afflicted and saw that it was really happening, and went to visit the old Irish lady in jail. And he said, "My dear, you're a Christian, right?" "Well, yeah, I'm a Catholic." "And but you know that it's witchcraft is against, Christianity. You can't do that to anyone." "Well, they insulted me, and I talked to my prince. And my prince is I'm never going to give up my prince, and my prince has these powers, and I did this to these two girls." And he tried to reason with her and get her to remove the curse. And he said, "They're going to hang you. They've written to Europe, and this is the procedure. Witchcraft is a capital offense." And she said, "I don't care. I won't remove the curse." And they did end up hanging this woman. And they had a terrible time. He took one of the girls into his home and found that only in his study was she normal. And that he accounted, this is a bizarre account. And Mather was a very sober, intelligent, educated man. This girl would be seen like riding an animal, an invisible animal, around the place, and it would break through doors, and it would go through places in the house and make a huge mess. And there were lots of witnesses to this. And eventually, what Mather did is he formed a prayer circle, and they just a giant prayer circle, and they prayed, and these girls got better. But this Mather's letters became famous in New England about this event and triggered a witch hysteria outside of Boston in Massachusetts, at Salem particularly. Have you ever heard the story before?
No, no, I'm not familiar
And the
with this.
historians agree that what happened in Salem was a kind of hysteria. But it's just like with UFOs. Somebody sees something that's maybe real, that's been a phenomenon for thousands of years. It gets into people's heads, it gets exaggerated, it creates a hysteria, creates a movement. Well, this is what you had here happen in New England.
I think this is
But if you read Mather and you read there was a Jewish historian that wrote a biography of Mather, and he said, "Well, this does appear to have actually happened."
I think this is this whole underlying thing, I think, is very, very much reflected in American horror cinema, because now
Yes.
it's Halloween season, right? So people rewatch
Oh yeah.
all these classic horror movies, and I mean, the most successful, or the most well-known American horror movies, they usually the story usually revolves around some sort of an object from either Europe, or something from Europe, or even further from the old Mesopotamia region. And somehow this object ends up in America, this occultic thing, and somebody is somehow accessing this occult object, or this occult power, and then of course all hell breaks loose. This is basically the storyline of Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. This is the story of The Exorcist from 1973, I think it was. And this is something you see over and over again. I mean, I recently rewatched some of these films, and for example, in the Evil Dead from the 1980s, it's a story of these young Americans, and they go to this cabin in the mountains, and they find this tape recorder, and they find this ancient book of the dead, and they find this ancient dagger. And so the recording on the machine is from a scientist, a researcher who found this stuff with the incantations from an old Sumerian. He found it in an old Sumerian temple, and he brings the stuff to America. And these young idiots, they play the whole recording, including the incantation, and that's when the spirits, the evil spirits that are partially even there already, they're then activated and they all get possessed. They all get possessed by this really, really evil demon. And the Exorcist, the original movie, the movie starts basically in ancient Mesopotamia. It's this excavation in Iraq. The first shot of the movie is the sun, like the sun gods. And in this excavation, they find this little figure of the ancient Pazuzu demon, and this Catholic priest. This Catholic priest sees the little figure. He also looks at faces off against this bigger demon statue, and then he gets recalled to the East Coast, like I think it's Washington D.C. The Washington D.C. area, and he's supposed to go there to perform an exorcism, because somehow this demonic force made its way to America, to the United States.
Well, you've got H.P. Lovecraft and the story of Cthulhu, right? And the story of these, and of course, this is tremendously imaginative, but and it has had quite an effect. Part of the reality behind that is that in the 1840s, they were digging through Ashurbanipal's, the one of the last Assyrian kings. They were digging through his library. They found it, and they had all this cuneiform, all these books. And one of the books, you can access this online. It's The Summoning of the Seven Wicked Spirits, and it is creepy. You start to read it, and it's so evil. It gives you such a bad feeling. You have to stop. You can't really. You feel there's something, even in translation. This is originally in an ancient Sumerian, not even in Babylonian or Assyrian, which are Semitic languages. And it seems that Ashurbanipal captured this document, cuneiform tablets, when he took Babylon. During his reign, he laid siege to Babylon and plundered it, and he wanted these occult books. And of course, what's ironic is across the street from Ashurbanipal's library were all of these occult books about raising evil spirits. They have the House of Exorcisms across the street, the ruins of the House of Exorcism. So this stuff goes back a long ways. And these old kings, Assyrian and Babylonian and whatnot, they're fighting over these control of these tablets, which is rather curious. And of course, you've got Nebuchadnezzar. The story of Nebuchadnezzar is very strange, because you wonder if Nebuchadnezzar isn't possessed when he starts to act like an animal at one point, right? He's the guy that destroyed Jerusalem, laid siege to it, and that's when the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. But and of course, this was the great Babylonian captivity, where the prophet Daniel was taken in captivity to Nebuchadnezzar, and you had Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace and so on. But Nebuchadnezzar's one of these evil tyrant types, and his family is ultimately overthrown by the Persians. But and of course, he is the one who destroyed Assyria and laid waste probably to that same palace with those books in cuneiform writing. But this goes back to a long way in history. And of course, we don't even fully understand what these practices were about, how they related to Egypt and Israel and ancient Mesopotamia. They know that during the Babylonian captivity under Jewish houses, I think that they found in Babylon, were these talismans buried under the houses. I've read about. So there's been all kinds of strange beliefs and magical practices throughout history, and it's some of it is a lot of it is nonsense, but some of it there's some kind of reality there.
Yeah, I was interested. I was very, very surprised when I read this book by Adrian Mayer. It's called Greek Fire, Scorpion Bombs, and a few other things. It's quite a long title, and she's studied ancient biological warfare, and she requested the help of other scientists, so ranging from archaeologists to modern experts on biology. And what they could piece together was that biological warfare was actually a thing in the ancient world, and it was not just the limited these limited techniques that were previously known. For example, the poisoned arrows and poison arrow tips and redirecting streams or poisoning streams so the enemy's drinking water is contaminated, or but it was actually more advanced than this. So there are instances of one empire placing diseased animals, I think it was anthrax, placing diseased animals somewhere where the enemy would then pick up these animals because they believed these were just stray animals. And so they were taking this disease back to their home. And there's also mentionings of diseased people, especially young women, being sent to the enemy. And so it's difficult to reconstruct a single operation, but the overall picture is really, really fascinating. So I think it's also tied to the mythology and to the mystery cults, because some gods like Apollo, they were tied to this idea of diseases, and some of the iconography depicts some of these gods as if they were fighting a disease, or the Hydra, the many-headed Hydra. This is the black arrows. There was these invisible black arrows of death that were mentioned in the ancient world. So they had a concept of biological warfare, and there's some informed speculation that they were using certain vessels made out of, I think it was copper and silver. And so they could have stockpiles of infectious materials, and these stockpiles would be in specific temples. So that is kind of the scientific theory there. And it's
There,
like
there
this.
were some there were some Roman thinkers that speculated that there were germs that were too small to be seen that
Exactly,
were
exactly.
responsible for illness. Yeah, so they did
Exactly.
have some kind of conception. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's kind of this idea that is reflected even in modern horror movies, modern horror cinema, that you have sort of a vessel tied to occult things, and if you open this vessel, all hell will break loose. So just like in The Exorcist, when somebody becomes possessed, or in The Evil Dead, when they play this tape recording and then everybody gets possessed, or even the zombie movies. You know, some of the famous zombie movies, they never explained why the zombies even appeared. I mean, I think it was insinuated in Night of the Living Dead that some American satellite was causing this, and there was another zombie movie where some American military gas was causing the dead to rise from the graves. So it was kind of this whole idea from the 70s and the 80s that it's
never
always.
blame Karl Marx for people who act like zombies and eat other people's brains.
Yeah, or the famous Dawn of the Dead movie where the characters, they escaped to this shopping mall. This was, I think, a movie from 1979, Dawn of the Dead. So they escape to the shopping mall and they defend the shopping mall and they own it and they have everything and they don't want to share it. But then some motorcycle gang arrives and they try to take the mall from them. You know, this and you see the zombies in the shoppers, you know, walking around, and one of the characters asks, "Why do they come here? Why do these zombies come here?" And the answer is, well, this is the place they liked in their lives. So this stupid consumerism, supposedly, this is what they were all about. And so this was in those movies, but it's always like this. There's this origin of the problem, and then it spreads like a disease. Somebody has opened Pandora's box, and then everybody gets affected by it. So this is something you see over and over in these movies.
Yeah, the zombie apocalypse is always the capitalists and the consumers, never the communists. And they'll put Nazis. There's Nazi zombie movies too.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to see one where it's the communist bloc or the zombies, I don't think. But it's the thing is that if you want to, and I think this is where Eric Voegelin is interesting more and more to me, is that when he's saying that people there's this negativity, which is characterized in this Marxist philosophy and Nazi philosophy, where you have to go to violence, you have to go to destruction, because everything is so bad. That's the only way out. And this destructiveness, it's not a fantasy. It is what is in these people's heads. And it's manifested in reality through regimes like the Nazi and communist regimes, and like the rising wokeism in the United States and the horrors we saw that Hamas did last weekend. And we don't have any real proper way of talking about it. All people can do is use this wokeism, attack capitalism, attack white privilege, attack heterosexuals, and attack Christianity. That's all they do.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually, even today, some people actually believe that National Socialism could have worked out in the end if World War II had ended differently. But people like this, people in the extreme right wing, they never try to run a credible scenario. How would this have evolved, right? So there was this plan to rebuild Berlin and make a new capital city and call it Germania, and have all these Roman-style buildings that were larger than any other Roman-style building in the world. I mean, Hitler was obsessed with this sort of these sort of structures, these sort of buildings, and he even made his chief architect, Albert Speer, the head of the war production and the war procurement, which was a really odd choice. And it's, of course, many people wrote about Hitler and occultism, and quite a bit of what was written is false. It's not really true, but. I'm looking into this myself. I mean, some academics have looked into this. I mean, there's this one book by this British guy, like a Cambridge guy, an Oxford guy, I forgot his name, The Occult Roots of, what was it, National Socialism. It's one of the standard...
I've read that book.
Yeah, I have a copy too. It's one of the standard works, but he's being a total academic. He's not thinking like an intelligence guy at all. So he's just going from, baseline sources, and he says occultism was not a big thing with the Nazis. But the thing to remember about Hitler is that he was always trying his hardest to move up the ranks by any means necessary. So at some point he was getting into occultism. He was collecting this magazine called Ostara, and he had every single edition. He even went to the publisher in his early days when he was broke. He tried to buy the last issues that he didn't already possess. And so he was really into this, but at some point, and I think this is even in Mein Kampf, at some point he started to talk down to the Germanic occultism of the time, because he thought of these groups as too weak. So this is something you can find over and over with Hitler. He was getting into something new, and when this new thing had exhausted its usefulness, he found something that was more elite, it was more exclusive, and then he was trash talking the thing he was into before. So he was moving up. Yeah. He was moving up the ranks in society, and especially in Munich and other parts of Germany, you can find some really, really old stuff. hard to document, but there are some, because let's face it, Munich is really, really close to, or southern Germany is really, really close to where ancient Rome was, or at some point, the south of Germany was part of Rome. And this is sort of when the Romans met with the Germans, and these two mythologies met. So the Germans had their own cults, their older cults, and this is where it all met. And this is the place, Bavaria, where Hitler became a successful politician. So there's quite a bit of scary ancient stuff going around, and that was far more elite than what Hitler had been into in his early days. So he was trash talking like these baseline occultists. He called them cowards. They would not fight the communists in a physical sense. They were just posers and all that. But all the time, Hitler was moving up and up and up the ranks of society, and so he was constantly upgrading his occultism along the way, and his fancy. He was always a big fan of ancient Rome. That was his great passion, the Roman Empire, and that's why if you're at Nuremberg here in Bavaria, you can see these old buildings. There's one of the buildings here. It looks like the Emperor Augustus Colosseum from Rome. It's almost a replica, and this is in Nuremberg. This is right next to the area where they had these big Nazi rallies. So this was all based on Rome. So the obvious thing to investigate is Hitler's connection to old systems of occultism, and be it mystery cults or be it some later variation of those mystery cults. So this needs to be looked at. You can't just go and read the baseline academic books or read the mythology that's being spread around. You have to go deeper than that.
Well, there was his connection to Dietrich Eckart,
Yes.
who was, in fact, a translator, the German translator of the Norwegian playwright Ibsen, and Ibsen's Peer Gynt. Ibsen's, it's very funny. There's a book called Hitler and I think it's called Hitler and Ibsen, and it's I have it back here on the shelf, and it's I don't know if you've ever had a look at it. I think I mentioned it to you last week, but this is a very strange book because this guy, he got funding, I think, through the Holocaust Museum to turn this paper he did into a book. What he discovered was that in Hitler's speeches and writings were major plagiarisms from Ibsen's writings, Ibsen's plays. And for example, Ibsen wrote, what was it, The Master Builder, right? A play about an architect. Well, the whole architect thing is big with Hitler, as you well know. It isn't just Albert Speer. Hitler was aspiring to be an architect. Then there was, I think the play was called Ghosts. It was about syphilis. And of course, this story about Hitler having syphilis. There was The Enemy of the People, which was about a doctor who finds that the town's water supply is poisoned by some kind of bacterium. And of course, the Jews are described by Hitler as this poisonous germ in society that has to be combated. And so that there's things taken from this play in Hitler's speeches. And on it goes. And here is Eckhart, an occultist, a member of the Thule Society, who was the translator of Ibsen into German. And this is so strange. I mean, I read the book twice because it so boggled my mind, but there's no doubt he's onto something, because you can't literally have verbatim plagiarisms on that scale without some kind of explanation.
Right.
Right? And so it's almost like there was a template. And of course, as I mentioned before, occultists use metaphor and simile, and they use these structures that are similar from place to place. There's like a template. And it seems like, and Eckhart once was quoted as making the statement, Hitler will dance and we've called the tune. So he's going to do basically what we've programmed him to do. What does that mean? Was there some kind of secret Ibsen codis? Was Ibsen into the occult?
Hmm.
What is behind this? Have you ever heard of this before?
No, not that. But been looking into I've been looking into the recent studies about these really really old families. I mean, going back 1,000 years, going back 1,200 years. These old families, they did join the NSDAP party, Hitler's party. Quite a few of them, and they joined quite early as well. So this has been interpreted by researchers in different ways. So the standard interpretation is that the aristocracy in Germany, they lost their status after World War I, and of course this is true. The nobility was officially ended. So you still had the name. You still had the prestige, but you did not have the official power that you had before on German territory. And so the standard interpretation says, well, these aristocrats, they crave more power again, and they saw the National Socialist Party as a way to attain greater power. And this, I think, is a very, very lame reading of history. Because these families, they had tremendous wealth, and they had tremendous power, and they had way more territory because, especially the oldest of these families, the Welfen, for example, Welfen families, they go back to at least the year 800, and they claim they go back even further, taking over from the Roman Empire. And in 1714, Britain's new king was someone from the Welfen line, King George I. And so this is a very, very, very large family, and he tried to keep a low profile, and meanwhile his family members and their assets, they were flooding Britain. I mean, they've been doing this for a while. This is how they removed the Stuarts from power, basically. So you have these very old families, Welfen, Wettiner, Reginare, and these sub-lineages with names that are more commonly known, because these names also describe the places they controlled, such as Hessen or Schleswig-Holstein. But these old families, they had new territory. They were in Britain, they were in Denmark. Britain had these colonies. These families also moved quite a few assets into the United States. This is also something I'm currently researching. These old British sort of networks that were built in the United States after the Revolution. And so what would be the point? Why would these old families support these crazy Nazis? Why would they support them to gain more power? They already had vast amount of power and territory. Why would they even mess with the Nazis? So this baseline reading of history is not really convincing to me. So, as I've said, very old families, so they probably were involved in some very old mystery cults. And this, of course, probably relates to Hitler as well. So let's say a guy like Eckhart can connect Hitler to some other people, and Hitler wanted to move up the ranks. And there's quite a bit of historical evidence that some of these old families, they really helped Hitler's rise to power. So, for example, the old von der Schulenburg clan, they sort of prevented the last-ditch effort to keep Hitler away from power. So this was when this was like in 1930, 32, 33. There was a chance of mobilizing the troops, just removing the Nazis from the places of power they already had, and then reestablishing some normal system. But this last-ditch effort was subverted by, for example, the Schulenburg family. And so it is likely these old families would have tried to recruit Hitler for some sort of more elite occult system, and forging these ties. And some of these ties have never been properly looked at, because remember, the Nazis had this idea of making a deal with Britain and the United States. So because
Yeah.
these three empires, they were all white people basically. So this was sort of
Well, they focused on using Hitler. They wanted Hitler to move in the direction of the Soviet Union. And there
right.
was even in Mein Kampf a reference to, reigniting the Russian Civil War by going into Ukraine, by detaching Ukraine and refighting the whites versus the reds. There was in Germany in the 1920s still significant number of Russian refugees who were willing to take up arms again and go back.
Right, and it's just like when the Nazi Party was gaining traction in the 1920s and then the early 1930s, the party was always broke. They were bleeding money everywhere because they tried to impress people with these big rallies, and they had the SA group going around beating up people opposing the Nazis. So all of this cost money, and they were constantly running out of money, and always magically new money was appearing from various sources. And so usually you would expect a quid pro quo from these old families. So if they are in negotiations with the Nazi Party, they would say, well, we can work together, but we have to bring you into this thing that we've cultivated for so long, so we can trust each other more. So this is likely the way things were played, and so it's not surprising to me that British historians have refused to look at this, and also German historians have refused to look at this. So they just go by
Just like Russian historians refused to look at Stalin's role in bringing Hitler to power.
Right, and
It seems like Hitler played all the sides to get where he wanted to go.
yeah, but even when Hess made his weird trip to Britain in this small airplane, the point of this trip, as far as we can reconstruct it, the point of this trip was to meet with his contact people in Britain from the aristocracy. There were quite a few connections, the Haushofer connection and more. So this was supposed to be a meeting to make some sort of a thing happen, to make some sort of a deal happen. And there was this plan of the Nazis to bring this one guy to get this one guy to the British throne who was sort of pro-Nazi. So the Nazis really believed they had a deep-rooted connection to the old aristocracy, because in the Nazi mind, in the Nazi view of history, these old German aristocrats, these old German families, these old German families, they had lost power to the Jewish conspiracy. So especially in Britain.
Yeah.
So Britain was taken over by the Rothschilds, and so we have, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that kind of was the weird. If Hitler really believed that, it really undid him in the end because he was wrong. And but the interesting thing is that Hitler, the aristocrats, got a snootful of Hitler and felt that Hitler was bad in the end, and Hitler wanted to eradicate them. I think it's in Table Talk where Hitler talks about after the war he's going to eradicate the aristocrats. He's going to hang them all.
Yeah, he was so full of himself. Yeah, he was so full of himself. He thought of, in a way, he thought of these aristocrats as losers, because they had lost power, especially lost power to the Jewish conspiracy. For example, like in England, but also in Germany, because for the longest time Germany was not a unified empire. It was just these little bits and pieces, and Hitler also hated the old Austrian aristocracy because he thought it was so weak. It was no match for the old Roman Empire. It didn't hold a candle to the Roman Empire. So these aristocrats were doing it wrong, and Hitler thought he was doing a much better job. But this was like his game. He was always trying to move up in society, gain somebody's help, and then ditch them. But he was getting into some families, and he underestimated these families, I think, in a big way. And he thought he could use their help, but these families, for a long time, they had infiltrated the right-wing extreme movement, starting at somewhere around 1850. So this is around the time when the communists ditched the whole Jewish conspiracy thing, which was actually quite popular in the French early socialism. They invented this whole Jewish conspiracy thing. So the communists ditched this idea. The right wing was picking it up. But I've systematically looked at all the major right wing organizations from 1850 to the Nazi power grab, and pretty much all of them had pretty much all of these groups had members from these very, very old families, and they were putting money into it. They were involved in occultism, going back quite a long time, and also they could establish these intelligence circles, and some people from these old families, I think it was the Mecklenburg aristocracy in the north. These Mecklenburg families, I think the Reventlow clan, I think they ran Martin Bormann, the big traitor, who because he was involved with them. Bormann in his early days, he was heavily involved with these families, and this is sort of the massive
Bormann
danger.
Was a double agent, a triple agent?
No, I think Bormann was originally cultivated by the Mecklenburg aristocracy, but some of these
acquired him.
Some of these aristocrats, they became involved with the whole communist thing, and they got themselves involved, and it's not really clear if somebody higher up, if somebody turned and started to work for the communists, this turncoat would have inherited an asset like Bormann, and for some reason Bormann was willing to give up all the secrets to the Russians. And so this is kind of the danger, because many people came out of these right-wing groups and joined the NSDAP, but there were quite a bit of spooks in there, quite a bit of traitors in there.
So if they could turn one of the leaders of one of these groups, they could turn all the agents over to the Russian system.
I mean, even if these people who probably ran Bormann, these people could have. I mean, even if these people who ran Bormann, even if these people primarily worked for Britain, and Britain's aristocracy, because of the family relations. Even if they worked for the Britons, they could have still decided to give away the German military secrets to the Russians.
Interesting. Well, we've gone 2.5 hours now, and we covered so many things. Oh my gosh. I can't believe how much stuff we've covered, Alex. Alex Benesch, thank you so much. And I'm Jeff Nyquist. And I want to thank those who have hopefully have listened to this a half hour at a time here and there, and you've caught a lot of it. But it's been sort of a super seminar on espionage, the occult, and all the various aspects of it.
Well, it's creepier. It's creepier than any horror movie out there for Halloween. I can guarantee you that.
It is a Halloween theme, no doubt about it. And there's even more. We really, this subject is not easy to exhaust, is it?
No, it's not. I think the big secrets are still out there.
They are. Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you, folks, for listening.